Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome. My name is Adam Block. I'm the chair of the Needham Planning Board, and I call this meeting to order. This meeting is being held in a hybrid manner consistent with current state regulations, and it's being recorded. All supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available on the town's website at needhamma.gov. The first item on our agenda is the board's vote to appoint 2 planning board members and 2 public planning board representatives to be formed Housing Needham Advisory Group, known as the HONE Committee. For members in the public that are with us and are following at home, this is a 9-member board. The planning board would have 2 representatives. The select board has 2 representatives. FinCom has a representative. That's 5. The select board appoints a member at large from the community and another resident, obviously, and then another resident who is a renter. And if I understand correctly, has the select board, they've voted their 2 representatives, is that correct?
That's correct.
And those 2 are
I think Heidi Friedman.
Heidi Frail.
Yeah.
and Kevin Keane.
Right.
And then,
Who's gonna be the chair? Who's gonna be the co-chair of
I believe it's gonna be Heidi.
Heidi?
and then, do we know whether they've appointed they have not appointed their 2 members? And do we know which representative from FinCom? Or do we know when they're scheduled to appoint? John Conley? Right, good, excellent. And then we're gonna vote tonight on 2 planning board members. I'd like to take that up first, and then we'll come to the discussion of, and then we'll come to our discussion on the members of the public that we'll appoint based on the 6 applications we've received. So, Natasha, I think you've offered to step up. Is that right? You're still willing and
Yes.
able and interested?
Yes, I'm
Good.
interested.
Would someone like to make a motion to appoint Natasha?
I would like to make the motion to appoint Natasha to the Housing Needham Advisory Group as the planning board member to serve as co-chair.
As one of the planning board members?
As the planning board member to serve as co-chair. So
Oh, I see.
co-chair and
Representative.
planning board member.
Okay.
I would second that, but are we the ones that are deciding which one's the chair and co-chair on that group? We're
That's
not,
my
the
motion.
we're not the ones deciding, are we? Which one's gonna be chair and co-chair in that group?
Well, we know that it's
Co-chair, I should say.
gonna be, it's gonna be co-chaired by one member of the planning board and one member of the select.
No, I understand. I wasn't sure. We had the
Or
authority to
they
say which
do.
one is going to be. the
Lee?
co-chair.
I believe you have that discretion.
Okay, so I second that.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Paul, a second by Artie. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll come to the vote in alphabetical order. Paul Alpert,
Aye.
Artie Crocker,
Aye.
Natasha Spada,
Aye.
Jean McKnight.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Congratulations, Natasha.
Thank you.
And now, Jean, you've also
Yes,
expressed
I
interest.
know at our June meeting, I think it was next June 13th, I very strongly expressed an interest in continuing my work. You know, I was with Natasha, co-chair of the Housing Plan Working Group. And, you know, I think I appreciate the response of our town, both the select board and the planning board and the Housing Plan Working Group in wishing to comply with the MBTA communities law. And I know the Housing Plan Working Group put out a proposed means of compliance, but the whole idea of the process we're going into is to put forth that idea, but listen to people about other ideas they may have for how to comply with the MBTA communities law. And I want to make sure people realize that I'm quite open to other ideas that people will bring forward so that we can end the process with a good solution to compliance with the law.
So I understand that. Is there, are there other members as well that would like to serve, or shall we take a motion? or
Well, I
discussion?
just, we briefly touched on this and I'm fully in favor of Jean serving. I mean, she clearly wants to do it, which is great. But what happens when, because Jean has stated that she's not gonna run for reelection,
Right,
and this is a planning board member seat. And the committee is going to last probably until the following October. Or even later, so the question then becomes, are we going to be able to just let Jean continue to be our planning board representative on the committee, or is somebody going to have to step in and replace her in April? I mean, we already know that in April, somebody's gonna have to step in and replace you on the CPC.
Yes, at least I expect so.
Yeah.
The CPC is considering appointing former members. There was a discussion of that at the last meeting. I see a scenario. There are two ways of doing this. One is when you look at the timing for the work of the housing of Needham Housing Needham Working Group, Home Working Group, it falls into two parts. One is the community meeting part that comes, a process that comes up with what is it we want to bring before the planning board. And that process, according to the timetable that's presented here, is likely to go to April. And then the process is the various hearings, probably more than one, and drafting of the zoning to bring it before the planning board. So it does fall in kind of two areas. And I could easily be involved in the first area and then somebody else pick up the second area. However, what I'm hoping is that people will be quite satisfied with my role on the committee. And then the planning board and the select board, which are the two boards that voted on the structure of the committee, would take a vote to say that a former member of the committee of the planning board can be a member of the home. And if that vote was taken by the two boards, then I could continue.
so I thought we voted for the charge at our last meeting. Oh, I thought, did we discuss that issue?
Oh, we did discuss it, and you know,
resolve
it's
that?
funny, it was said, oh, it's too late to bring that idea to the select board. But the fact is, we brought another change to the select board, and that was on the 4 different type of professions that we'd be looking at, and we did bring that before the select board.
Did we?
Yes, that went back to the select board, and they made a decision on that at their subsequent meeting. So I felt bad that I didn't.
I thought that hadn't changed.
Oh, that did change.
Yeah, that did change. So we could have done that, but we didn't do that, but it can be done later.
So,
I'll nominate Jean to serve as the second planning board member, and then we'll deal with April when April comes.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so my only concern is, I mean, you always love when the enthusiasm, you need enthusiasm, that's what you need. It's people that want, that you need enthusiasm with people that want to serve. That's important, that's one of the first critical things, along with the ability to serve, of course, you need both of them. My only concern is that you and Natasha were the two people on the housing working group that they already had a year and a half or so going on. And now we have a different group starting. And both of you want to continue on that different group. That's going beyond your term. I just have a little concern about, I mean, it's good to have continuity, but it's also good to have something different as well. So that's my only concern. I don't doubt your commitment, and your commitment is 100%. I don't doubt your ability. I'm just concerned about having the same two representatives on the planning board on this different group again. That's my concern. And anyway,
I'm not as concerned about that because this is really just one small aspect of the entire
Mhm.
housing plan. The housing plan dealt with so much more
Mhm.
than just this.
Yeah, sure.
And
sure.
to be honest, I don't even know how much the housing committee really focused in on this because it was published in December, was published in the fall. I don't even think the first draft of the guidelines had come out, but they were totally revised because there were a lot of comments and so I don't know that there was that much in the Needham Housing Committee that dealt with this particular issue of the MBTA community law and guidelines and fitting it in. And this committee is really a very focused charge, which is drafting the amendments to the bylaws.
Mhm.
The only comment that I'm going to make, because you did have this and you were fairly optimistic, is the word that I'll use, that we could satisfy the MBTA guidelines by just designating the area as apartment A1. I think you need to be open to going beyond that because I'm not sure that that's going to work.
Certainly, until we are working with the consultant who is doing the geographic information system and using the factors that are in the Department of Housing and Community Development's guidelines for what land is called, quote, defined excluded land. We're not going to know whether what we put forth is going to work. As I agree with you, by the time we published this and made our final decisions on it, the DHCD guidelines, the final version had been put out, but it had only been put out for a couple of months, and there really was some factors on it that had made us rethink some things. But I think what I bring to the table is a deep understanding of the DHCD guidelines. Look forward to working with the town consultant, and just really bringing that, what I think is really a pretty good knowledge of those guidelines to the job.
I'm comfortable with Jean getting started. As I said, we can deal with April when April comes. If the decision is made that Jean has to step off because she's no longer a planning board member, I'm confident that Jean will be able to bring whoever takes her place totally up to speed.
Aaron may just ask just one question. So Gene, as I said, I know you're infusing the ability, the enthusiasm, everything that's necessary is there. So again, the concern I have is that you've already been on the other working group, and you've already stipulated here that you'd be open to listening to other thoughts and what could happen. So I guess my question is, I guess I'll just ask that again. To what amount, as far as, I mean, these, one problem that as human beings we get into, here's the thoughts we have, here's the plan that we have. So our brain gets focusing on that direction. So are you going to be able to completely step back and listen and refocus if something is necessary? That's what's necessary.
Yes, I certainly think I can. One reason why we focused on apartment A1 is we already have many developments in our town that were built in the 80s with that zoning. People are familiar with it. But certainly there the sites that readily lend themselves to development under those, that zoning, complies with the MBTA law, are few. And, there may be proposals that come before us for having higher density, because I call that a suburban density, 18 units per acre. I call that a kind of a suburban, like a garden apartment density. And we may find people commenting and saying what we really need is a higher density in near the downtown or something, some other ideas. And certainly we'll listen, of course.
And Artie, can I add something else? I think, Jean, I appreciate all of your knowledge and the depth of all the information that you've been getting from MBTA communities. And I think it would be great to have all of that knowledge as part of this committee. But I also think that there are other people that are part of this committee, Artie, that can also balance some of the ideas that might have come up in the housing working group that might be challenged. And I think that as we put together the rest of the group, and as John Connolly will be there, Kevin Keane will be there, people that were not part of that group, it'll balance itself out, I think, with the knowledge from all of the different constituents of the group. So I think Jean brings a lot of breadth of experience that it would be really beneficial for the group. But again, I think there are going to be other voices that will also may even contradict the work that has already been done.
I can appreciate that, Natasha. Keeping in mind that as representatives from the planning board, you're gonna have, both you would have a high level of authority, I guess, high level of people would understand that your experience and where you're coming from, because you've been in the working group plus you're on the planning board. So that has a lot of weight to it. And so you would have, so people would take that into account. So yes, there would be different voices, but they'd also be looking to people that are on the working group already, but also on the planning board. And so in this case, it would be one and the same.
Right.
But
I think
planning board.
But I think the difference is that there's going to be targeted community process specifically for this, where before it was a community process for the entire and not specifically for this. I think what we need to do and what we have to do is listen to the community and gather the information and be able to convey it. So it's not, it's a completely different process. So yes, we were both working on it, but at the same time, to me, it's a completely different process, and it's going to be community led, to tell you the truth, because with our guidance and with the information, that all of the different constituents bring to the table.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I mean, there's no doubt that in my mind that you've done so much of the heavy lifting for the housing plan working group, and you have a lot of working knowledge to carry forward, as this housing plan from December will form part of the basis of an early stage framework for a bylaw change for compliance. And I absolutely hear you that you're not dead set on a particular vision, that you'll take seriously alternative concepts as part of that framework and building that framework. There is something to be said. Who else from the select board was on? Dan was on and then was off.
Heidi.
Heidi was on.
So we've got-
Marcus
so-
and Marcus.
So
Marcus.
a third of this committee would be comprised of people from the other committee. There is something to be said about trying to have a diversity of voices on this home committee, knowing that there's still, a significant opportunity for you and also for members of the public to continue to play an influential role in shaping the public policy. So I like the idea of having a bit more diversity of voices, yet we have a motion on the floor. Paul, I think you made the motion.
I made the
correct?
motion, right?
So Natasha, are you seconding Paul's motion to appoint Jean?
I'll second it because I think Jean brings a lot to the table, but I mean, yes, I will second it.
Okay. So we have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert,
I vote yes.
Artie Crocker,
Aye.
Natasha Spada,
Aye.
Jean McKnight,
I,
Adam Block, the chair votes aye. Congratulations, Jean.
thank you, Paul.
Uh,
Thank you for your confidence. I appreciate it.
Disappointed.
What?
You just. You call me up and say, gee.
Yeah, I will.
Really stay
We've
down?
known each other long enough.
Jean, you
to-
said you were gonna be open-minded.
So now we're coming to the point of, public representatives for the planning board. And just as a reminder for those that may be watching now or in the room or subsequent to this meeting, the planning board's remit for the public representatives are to choose two residents that have backgrounds in architecture, land use planning, land use laws, an attorney, and or real estate developer. And to that end, we've received 6 applications. Natasha was unable to participate. Thank you, Paul, for stepping up to help with the interview process. Paul, Lee, and I conducted the interviews. And of the 6 candidates, Paul and I recommend attorney Ron Roof, who has been a former member of the planning board.
I'm gonna say we wholeheartedly recommend
Yes,
Ron Ruth.
yes, that's absolutely right. So, and then Paul and I, we're looking very seriously at 2 other candidates that really seem to both be excellent candidates. We were grateful for all of the 6 candidates that stepped forward and expressed their interest. There were a few whose immediate professional background and experience and interest is squarely within this focus of this committee. So the other 2 that Paul and I have been thinking very seriously about recommending are Amanda Berman, who has a background in housing policy and community development as a former employee of Newton, on the one hand, and on the other hand, Bill Lovett, who works for the Claremont Companies and previously for Toll Brothers, and brings a developer type experience. And one thing that I would say is here we're creating, and in response to the state requirement, a fundamental change in our housing policy and our bylaw in order to facilitate the production of more housing units that ultimately will create a greater affordability in our town and in the region. I think it would benefit the town to have a voice. None of us, Jean, Ron, no one from the select board or FinCom, I know John Connolly, I think, is a construction litigator, and yet no one else has really been at the table, have been at risk as a developer looking to develop a project that's actually going to be viable. I'm not saying that this whole thing should be in any way steered towards a carte blanche for developers to take over our town. I am thinking that of one of the 9 voices on the body, I think it would be helpful if we had someone who understood what's required, who understands a balance of the needs of the community to actually make something viable, a viable project, who is at risk and is on the hook for all of the permits, all of the requirements, the financing and everything. I just think that's a very beneficial voice on the committee. So, Paul, did you want to add?
Well, you've just made your case for Bill. And I would like to make my case for Amanda. Let me start by saying, and I hope that Adam would agree with me, that whichever of the two we choose will be a good choice for this committee. They both bring a lot to the table. I am more in favor of Amanda, who is a land use planner. I believe, she's a housing planner. Oh, yeah, she's a housing planner, which is land use. And I believe she has an undergraduate degree in it. And as stated, she was working for the city of Newton in this field for 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
I believe that the people that she worked with in Newton would vouch for her. I would hope so. I would think so. Amanda first applied for the housing plan committee. And unfortunately, we didn't choose her for that. So she's now stepping up to the plate a second time. I was impressed with her enthusiasm at the interview. She is now a stay-at-home mom and has made a point of saying, now she has the time to devote to working on this committee, and she clearly has the enthusiasm of wanting to work for the town of Needham and work on the housing issues for the town. As I said, she was very enthusiastic. Unfortunately, I didn't get the sense of enthusiasm in Bill. Bill,
Adam,
don't interrupt. Okay. Bill was late to even apply, and in fact, he was approached by the board because we didn't have a developer applying. I don't know who Ron Luke's clientele are. He may have developers as a clientele as well as John Connolly. And believe me, having worked with Roy Kramer all these years, I know what it means to have a lawyer who represents developers and what the mindset is that is brought to the table. I was kind of taken aback when Bill asked whether this was just an advisory committee, because he said if it was just an advisory committee, he didn't want to serve on it. I told him it wasn't because the committee would be drafting the bylaws. Although I thought about that over the weekend, and it is kind of an advisory committee, because even though they're drafting the bylaws, it's still the planning board that's going to make the final decision as to what the bylaws say. This committee is just going to present something for the planning board to consider, and of course we have to go through the public hearing process before the bylaws are finalized. One other thing that I was thinking about over the weekend, so I didn't have a chance to discuss this with Adam, is that this committee may have a little broader scope, because one of the things that I noticed in my quick review of the guidelines is that the state agency recognizes the fact that even though this is a use as of right, an applicant would still have to go through site plan review in the site plan process. And I think one of the things that we learned in our hearings for 1688 Central Avenue is that we have some deficiencies in our bylaw provisions for site plan review when we have site plan review for a project that is as of right. And I would like to suggest that this committee, in considering the bylaws for the MBTA community, also consider amending our site plan review bylaws to take into account, and it's not on television, but Gene McKnight is going thumbs up at what I'm saying. I would like to see this committee also consider amending our site plan review bylaws to tighten up those bylaws when we're dealing with site plan review on an as of right project, which is, both Dover Amendment and I think a lot of the issues that we discussed on 1688, which was Dover Amendment, applies equally to a non-Dover Amendment as of right use. And I think that Amanda, with her experience in the city of Newton and being an urban planner, is someone who can hit the ground running on that aspect also. And as I said, she, I don't know how often she'll apply to do something if we keep rejecting her. But I think she's somebody who would very well become active in town and be an asset in the town. And I think this is a good place for her to get started. That's my pitch.
So I just to say there are a couple things that I do want to respond to.
I think we should, can we go around the circle first, Alan?
I want to just, if I can, we will. I just want to clarify a couple of things.
Okay.
One, on site plan review, that's not going to be in the remit of the of the home committee, but
I'm sorry, but I disagree, but we can talk about that later if you want to.
okay. I would think that process in and of itself would go through a planning board process, but
Well, ultimately, it is a planning board process.
well,
I
everything
think
else.
this committee has an opportunity to look at it and present ideas back to the planning board.
On how to revise and reform.
Yes.
I think that's true. I think, while we're under litigation on that matter, I'm not sure how much of an opportunity we have to deal with that.
Well, we're going to be dealing with this in October of 2024. I would hope that litigation is completed by October of 2024.
Almost complete by October 23.
And besides, that litigation deals with our bylaws as they existed at the time of our hearings. I don't,
Well, I can appreciate Adam's
Being-
concern,
well, no, being,
but yeah, I think it'll be over by then.
one, it'll
Well-
be over by then, and two, I've got no problem with the fact that when you, even if you're in litigation over something where the basis of that litigation has led whatever board, whatever legislative entity says, well, what we're dealing with is something that really needs to be looked at and revised, because clearly it has led to litigation the way it is, and might lead to litigation again if we just leave it alone. You look at it, you don't just sit back and, because it shouldn't affect litigation, even if it is continuing in October.
Well, perhaps we'll cross that bridge if or when we come to it.
So,
But anyway, Amanda Berman clearly has the credentials to deal with what this committee is going to deal with. And as I said, she clearly brings enthusiasm and the willingness to put the time.
I agree that they're both excellent, they're both strong candidates. I read Bill a little differently. I think he was equally interested in serving in a meaningful way. He was trying to just discern to what extent is this a meaningful thing, which is reasonable. I
just want to go off target here and just say something because I don't want to downplay and just put aside Oscar Mertz.
Yes, I was just gonna
Okay,
speak to that.
you know, Oscar is a very strong candidate also. But he decided against Oscar and are only coming back with these two as recommendations. Partly because Oscar was on the housing plan committee, and we've already had the discussion about having too many people who are on that committee continue. And so that's another one there. Natasha's an architect. You don't need to have another architect necessarily. And so we decided not to recommend Oscar, who is clearly has the credentials and would be a strong candidate. But Adam and I decided to just come back with Bill and Amanda. And of course, Ron.
I appreciate your making a statement about all the work that Oscar did. I don't want to break in and start talking when it's not my turn, but whatever.
So my back was towards you. I know that Gene wanted to talk, but you also wanted to.
No, just I want to make sure, you know, we're just, before there's too much back and forth with you guys and too, you know, we should kind of go around the room.
I'm gonna do that right now.
It sounded like there were two things. Was only one question you had about the bylaw and the site plan review? Was there anything else you need to clarify?
So,
Maybe I shouldn't give you the chance, but anything else you need to clarify? That there were two things.
I think there was some, but I'm just gonna move forward here, but thank you.
Okay, no,
I got it. Other than the site plan, which either will have an opportunity, this committee will have an opportunity to comment on or not, setting that issue aside. Gene, did you have any comments or questions?
Yeah, when I reviewed, first of all, I want to say I very much respect the fact that you two interviewed the people and we was involved too, and you made your decisions and your recommendations. I really respect that. Of course, you know, I went down and said A, B, B, C, C. And because I've already worked with Ron Rue and I've already worked with Oscar Mertz, I know how they work on committees. I know they'd be good. I have no doubt about it. So that's who I would prefer. But I didn't go through the process and I didn't interview the other people. And so I don't want to just say, that you're making the wrong decision or recommendation. I'm really torn. Actually, in reading the reviews, I went toward Bill Lovett as well. And a couple of things about Amanda Berman. She hasn't lived in town all that long. And also, we are going to have a professional consultant. And won't that professional consultant bring the same kind of skills to this work that Amanda Berman would bring? And I do think that we lack insight into the economics of multifamily development, and that Bill Lovett would bring that kind of insight. And I'm only saying that just from what I read of his review. So I'm really kind of torn. I kind of look on the idea of working with Amanda Berman. I would very much like to, but I hate to give up Bill Lovett. I really am torn. And as far as the work of the committee, including recommendations on our site plan review process, I think it has to do that. If we're going to recommend, this is going to be where we're going to zone and how we're going to zone by right development. At the same time, we have to be bringing before town meeting a site plan review process that will enable, so town meeting will know that there is going to be a review process. There are going to be hearings there, you know,
And there
There-
can't be,
and so it's part of the work, absolutely.
so I was looking at it slightly differently. I acknowledge and agree with what you're saying. Whatever site plan modifications we make, though, it's gonna be applied across all districts.
Absolutely.
And, you know, in every way that, you know, so it's consistent.
It's a
not just
broader
one.
thing.
Yes, that's what I
yeah.
was,
Mhm.
and there are implications for other uses and forms of development in other districts that may be different than this, but that's not the focus of this conversation. I apologize. I want to be able to continue.
Adam, can I,
Yeah.
and I know Artie, I don't know, Artie, if you want to go next, or if,
No, Todd, you're welcome. I mean, I can go, you can go, whatever you want to do, it's fine.
I just wanted to say that I feel similarly to Jean. I think Oscar is really great. And I think he's a strong contender, but I also think that there are a lot of us from that group. And I think he worked closely with Jean, so I feel comfortable that with the two recommendations, and out of the two recommendations, I think they're both excellent. And I also agree, Amanda Berman seems great, but I do kind of appreciate having a different voice, as Artie, as we were saying before, having a developer as part of the group, in addition to someone who's an attorney and in addition to the other members, I think would be beneficial to have different voices, give, have different opinions about how this should move forward. The other piece is that we've noticed, or I think we've noticed that we have made some zoning changes downtown and not had a lot of developers develop parcels in that area and in other areas where we thought we were making changes. So having the voice of a developer explain to us why some of these changes do not necessarily equal success I think would be really beneficial to the process, but I would go for either one. It's just, I think this person, Bill might bring something different that we don't have in the group right now.
Ready?
Okay, so when I was initially looking at them, certainly when I saw Ron Booth's resume, I just quickly skimmed, they went through it quickly just to make certain what he had related to the legal side, exactly what he was doing in his practice, because I know who he is. I've talked with him. I like excellent choice, no question about that. Then looking at the other ones, a couple of the other ones, we always have to appreciate everyone who applies. It takes a lot to step up and throw your name out there. So I thank all 6 people for stepping up and doing that, because it takes an awful lot to do that. Because we know that only 2 of them are going to be selected. And it's not against, there's really nothing against the other ones that are not selected. Certainly when I saw Oscars, certainly well qualified, but I also knew that, Natasha was likely going to be someone who wanted to serve. She's an architect. She's been in the working group. I know Jean expressed, enthusiasm as well, wanted to do it. So I kind of put Oscar to the side simply for that reason. It's that group is well represented, and plus anyone who's not on this group still have plenty of chance to represent their thoughts and their opinions and what's going on. So then I was looking at, Bill and Amanda, and when I first looked at Amanda, my initial comments, I admit it's a little bit of ignorance. I saw the word urban. It's like, no, we're not urban, we're suburban. I was like, no. So what's that all about? But reading through a lot closer, everything she has to offer. When I saw the creative aspect of her as well, that's that checked off another box for myself. She's a very creative person. That goes a long way when it comes to urban, suburban, urban planning. What are the thoughts on what we want where? Why do we want it there? So that brought her started to bring it to the surface. Then I was looking at Bill, and I think it's great to have the business aspect, the developer aspect. My concern is that, he's his company is representing large apartment complexes. That's mainly what he's been involved with, I believe. Well, for the most part, none of this has to do with that. I mean, in some ways that's good because he doesn't have a conflict. In some way that's bad because it's not really been his focus in his job. Is this type of development we're talking about? But I appreciate the fact that the business aspect of it plays a part. The economic aspect of it plays a part. But we have to focus on, I think we really have to focus on visually, what are we looking at for Needham? What do we want to have? Visually, what do we want it to look at? What type of businesses do we want in a certain part? Someone who's had, again, I know the representative of there, we're gonna have a person who's urban planning, who's a consultant on it. That's fine, but they're not from Needham. They're
The consultant.
they're outside of me. Okay, it's good to have someone in Needham, even though they've been working in Newton, but that's literally right next door. They are two different towns, two different issues, two different problems going on. But again, she has an awful lot to bring to the table, and that creative aspect does a lot for me. And from a pure business standpoint, are we gonna be missing that from a pure business? I'm not sure. I know he's a developer, but he's a developer in a completely different capacity, completely different realm.
I would challenge that a little bit. I
Okay.
don't want to belabor the point. But
Okay.
his development work is on point with the output from the MBTA communities. He's done small scale development and he's done medium and large scale multifamily development, which will be a mix of types of products. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. No, just when I was reading through that, that didn't jump up, and I looked at the LinkedIn pages for all of the people that we were thinking about, and I didn't see anything that jumped out as far as that, but I could have missed it. So I'm heading more into the Amanda side, because she really brings a huge depth of understanding that even though we have a consultant, it's something that we need directly on the board. And again, that creative aspect. And that's not discounting anything from Bill, because I can see what he brings. But from the standpoint of advisory, yeah, technically it's an advisory committee, technically, but the fact remains is we know damn well that whatever they bring to us is gonna have a lot of weight. It's gonna go through the public process, but we're expecting them to bring something which is 98% ready or something like that, depending what the public has to say. Maybe it'll only be 80% ready. Maybe the public will change 20% of it. But we're expecting it to be not simply an advisory committee, because they're literally bringing us the formula. That's what they're supposed to be bringing us. So it isn't quite just advisory, but that's where my brain's at. My brain's at a little bit more than Amanda right now.
The only,
I would hope, and this may just be a hope, but I would hope that it's not just Needham residents who are going to show up at these meetings. I'm hoping that we get Needham developers
Oh, we're gonna.
showing up,
Oh, we're gonna.
giving us their thoughts.
Oh, well, we're going to. We know
I
we're
hope
going
so.
to. We know we're going to, and we should. They've always had a voice.
So their voice will be heard.
Well, it's one thing that, to have someone write in a comment, but for someone to actually shape the policy that's going to impact the direct work of the thing, I think is a little different. But the last comment I want to make is that I asked all of the candidates what they saw as, benefits of compliance, and also what they saw as the risks and challenges of compliance. And Ron identified very specific transportation challenges and risks, public education, and the challenges of increased density to the infrastructure of the town. He was very well spoken and he was very specific. Bill also, I was able to identify very similar specific challenges to the process and to the municipality from that. And and I'll just say that other candidates weren't able to, to identify even and discuss really any of the challenges or obstacles or risks to the town. Except if we don't do enough housing, was seen as a risk. So I thought that it was good to have that understanding, to inform this public policy. So does anyone else have any other comments?
Have we heard from Natasha on this? Or
Yeah, that's right.
Natasha,
I already spoke. Yeah, I think both candidates are excellent. I think I was thinking, I didn't interview them, so I'm just hearing what everyone has to say. My thing is to try to get as diverse of a group as we can to have as many different points of views. So that's why I was leaning more towards Bill. But I mean, if I'll go along with either one of the candidates that everyone feels comfortable with.
so
no.
it sounds
I'm
like
seeing
three.
2 and 2 and Natasha.
Oh, no. I think I see a little more.
So my
two,
Zoom
but-
better not,
Yeah. If you see
And-
anything,
I better not turn it off.
Artie and I to an Amanda, the 2 of you to a Bill, and Natasha saying either one of them will.
Well, I think
Great.
we've all said that both candidates.
Both candidates be great.
So setting
Both
that
candidates be
aside,
great.
Natasha, are you more inclined towards Bill?
Or Amanda.
I guess I'd like to get Lee's perspective, if that's okay, just in the sense of, do you feel?
Hey, we are this. I love it.
I agree. That was good.
Well, does Lee feel, do you feel like the consultant that will be there will have the same experience as Amanda and they will be kind of duplicative, or do you think that there's a value in having them both?
Or a distinction?
We have Karen Sonnenborg, who is trained as a housing planner and brings a lot of that housing expertise to the table. So I would say, we have a lot of housing, we have a strong housing voice, I think, already present. And the consultant is probably going to have a skill, I would say, not so much as a housing planner, which is what Amanda brings to the table, but I think it's probably going to be more of a land use planner, a person with expertise in urban planning, and somebody with expertise in urban design. So the consultant's it's gonna be really looking more, I think, the land use and urban design issues. And whether or not the development proposal that you generated is going to satisfy the numbers that DHCD wants. In terms of housing policy and familiarity with housing policy, I think that comes probably through Karen Sonnenborg or a person like Amanda.
And
Go ahead.
I was just rereading Amanda's background. And one thing does stand out to me where she says, I have created numerous community outreach and engagement campaigns that correspond to these efforts, and the efforts being urban planning efforts. And that's going to be the heart and soul of this process, especially at the beginning. And I'm really torn, but now I'm beginning to think that experience, the community outreach and engagement, will be
That's-
very helpful to us.
Well, that's gonna be, that we already know that's. I don't mean to be, I'm not saying
Yeah.
this in favor of one candidate or another, but we know that we're gonna have a robust public process and public engagement through Lee and through the town manager's office. We know, and we know that, that our, that staff will help shape up that process. And all members, are gonna be contributing towards that, all home members and the planning board and FinCom and the select board. So,
Adam, may I ask,
Yeah.
may I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Getting back to Bill for a second. Can you tell me again, express again why you believe he's the better choice?
so, Paul, you're also an attorney. And, deal with your own clients, and my father was, a litigator as well, a construction litigator, and. Like John Connolly did, they did fine work, but it's very different being a client than being the attorney. And I think that if we're developing public policy, that deals solely with multifamily development, I just think it's smart planning to have someone who deals with this in a professional way, who understands what that balance needs to be, not in favor of a developer, but the balance of density, the balance of impact between schools, finance, roadway network and transportation, impacts in public safety and other parts of the town. He was able to speak to those, and frankly, Amanda's response to that question was that the only challenge for the town is if we don't produce and we don't do enough to create more housing, and when didn't actually speak to these other elements of significant impact for the town. And let's be clear that the greatest impact is going to be felt, along, not in SRA, but in SRB. And I think it's important to have that mindset as part of what's informing and influencing the public policy at the outset. So that's what stuck out for me.
Well, I mean, certainly, we have a requirement. Requirement is kind of, let's say, a fixed requirement, if you will. Then it's a matter of what we're creating. How do we accomplish that goal? So 1 + 1 = 2. Well, in this case, maybe 1 + 1 = 3. In some cases, if we have to, but we have to find a way to accomplish that goal. Yes, and then the schools will be impacted down the line. These 1,750 whatever units. It'll take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever it is, to accomplish that goal. So I'm trying to really figure out what part each person in the board will actually play in helping the town accomplish the best goal. That's what we're after. Each person will play a part. And what part does each
I
person
think
play?
each person will work with the others to reach a consensus
Yeah.
on what needs to go. You got to remember that ultimately what we're really dealing with here is developing bylaws in compliance with the law and guidelines for the MBTA community, like the MBTA. It's ultimately basically a zoning, purely a zoning issue, or zoning bylaws, which includes the permitting process, because, this, I don't think I'm going to say anything new when I say that the problem that I had with the law to begin with was the fact that it was an as of right use, which took away a considerable amount of discretion of the planning board. I would have liked to have seen it be a special permit process, which I forget the name of the state agency. DHCD. That they recognize that, and so they specifically brought up the issue of the fact that there is site plan special permit review that will be part of the process.
Site plan review.
Site plan review.
Like,
We call it special permit, but it's site plan review. And so I think with that recognition, site plan review is a very important part of it, which is totally different, as we've discovered with 1688, but those of us who have worked with it before, which Gene and I have, we know that it's totally different when your applicant is there for a use as of right versus a special permit use. And so I I think that's gonna be part of it. I think Amanda has the background. I think Amanda has the experience for 4 years working for the city of Newton. To fill in the gaps that Adam is commenting about what he sees as the strength of having a developer on the committee rather than the land use urban planner.
Even if we already have that skill set in Karen and others.
You know, I like Karen. I like the idea of having a second voice in that regard. And I don't know who the consultant is and
Well, we haven't hired the consultant, but the skill set we're looking for is really somebody with urban,
I know.
with urban design skills
Yeah.
and zoning skills.
right, so. Go ahead, Gene.
no,
I
I
take
just
that back.
mentioned,
Excuse me,
Thank you.
I leave that to the chair.
Appreciate that.
you know, I just. As I started out saying, I am torn, and I just said something very positive about Amanda, and that is the, emphasis on community outreach and engagement, because that's going to be very important to the process. But it occurs to me that there's also another part of the process that we haven't discussed. We have inclusionary zoning in our town, and we have a number of different percentages, and we primarily have used 12.5%. That is, if you have 8 units, you have to have one of them affordable. We have to be able to prove to DACG that if we use that 12.5% and continue to use that it is economically viable. Bill would seem to me to bring we may have to hire our own special consultant on that to satisfy
Well,
DHCD.
As part of the RFP, we have indicated we want that analysis done. And we've indicated that we probably want them to look at more than one number, not the 12.5 certainly, but maybe there's a higher number that people also want to consider.
Uh-huh.
So the RFP that was just issued on Monday asked for the consultant to provide for that analysis
I see.
using 2 variables, 2 numbers selected by the committee at large to be analyzed.
Okay, so we're already got that covered. So I was thinking that as an experienced real estate developer, Mr. Lovett would be able to speak to that, the economic viability of the different numbers we're talking about. I wanted to throw that out as a positive aspect. I still feel torn, but I think we have to get to the point of making a decision. And I-
Yes.
I will, I move that, that we appoint to the committee, William Lovett.
We have a motion to appoint William Lovett. Do I have a second? Natasha, you want a second?
Second, yeah. I'll
Second
it.
by Natasha. Any further discussion? Hearing none. we'll
Well,
come-
in this particular case, I will vote against this particular one, only. That, outreach to the community is gonna be besides the fact that the bylaw has to be a really good bylaw. Outreach is gonna be almost everything related to this, to the community. We need a strong outreach on this one. And we can talk about how strong we're gonna be, and obviously the goal is to be strong, but having someone that has that in their back pocket is gonna be pretty vital. So that's the only reason. And that's the reason I will vote against Bill and I would vote in favor of Amanda.
Thank you. Any further, Ernie?
No, this is,
Anything? Any other discussion?
unless I can make a motion to appoint Amanda.
We have a motion first on the floor. For Bill, seconded by Natasha. Any further discussion, Paul? Ready to vote? So we'll come to the vote in alphabetical order. Paul Alpert? No. Artie Crocker?
No,
Natasha Spada?
Yes,
Jean McKnight?
Yes.
The chair votes aye. So
We have not voted Ron Ruth, and so I move that we appoint Ron
Oh,
Ruth.
yes.
oh,
do we have a second?
second,
We have a second for to appoint Ron Ruth. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert,
Aye.
Artie Crocker, Natasha Spada,
aye.
Jean McKnight.
I,
The chair votes aye. So we have we decided our two public representatives. We thank Bruce Wolfeld, Amanda Berman, Oscar Mertz, Ron Ruth, Sanjeev Jha, and Bill Lovett, all for applying and participating in the process. And we look forward to their ongoing participation throughout this process and their continued interest. This brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is a discussion with resident Joe Matthews to discuss our floor area ratio regulations. Are we able to bring Joe in by Zoom? Joe, are you able to turn on your video so we can?
Yes, I am.
Do you-
Let me,
Sure.
okay. Are you ready to start on my end?
Yeah, we can see you, we can hear you.
All right, I had prepared some slides, if I can share that.
Sure, we
It's
may
no
need
problem.
one. Is he able to share?
It should take over my screen, if I'm not mistaken. Or, hold on,
Do you see you're able to?
yes,
Okay,
just a little
great.
loading. So yeah, Joe Matthews, 31 Rosemary Street, Precinct I. I am in a town meeting currently. And so basically I had reached out to the planning board back in, I think, December the first time, just trying to address this issue of tear downs that are occurring in Needham and have been an issue for some years, and is an issue that is of great concern to many people in the town. Oops. So when we say tear downs, what we're really talking about is the demolition of existing housing and replacement with new housing that is of much larger size. If you're going by the marketed square footage, we're really talking about maybe a tripling of the size of the house. You're usually taking the lowest value or the smallest houses. So really those housing units from a single residence perspective, they're in that bottom quartile, and they become the new marginal highest house. As of 2023, as shocking as it sounds, this means 2.5 million or even approaching $3 million, not on large acre lots, but really on lots that are just 10,000 square foot. So just 10,000 square feet. So really the smallest ones that we allow in Needham. And I think previously a lot of the discussion of this topic is focused on the design, the character of the neighborhood, etc. But really, I view this as an affordability issue because these tear downs, it's not that the people are living in larger houses. I get it, that evolves over time. People have different preferences, but to add these new houses requires a removal of a house that it's what many would refer to as not affordable housing, but market affordable. This bottom or even the second quartile at this point. If there was a way that we could add more houses at that level, then this wouldn't be an issue, but that's never been the case as long as I've been around. I would say that these tear downs also have other negative impacts, such as the design and character of the neighborhood. I know this is a concern of the historical commission, and that this is, as this progresses, it really results in a loss of historical housing stock, loss of trees. This is kind of why we've discussed having a tree ordinance in the town, but unfortunately we have not adopted one. And I think also one that is not discussed yet, but I think is very important in the context of the MBTA communities law, which we've just discussed, is that if we've had, by some measures, around 1,000 of these tear downs over the past 12, 13 years, that's a lot of financing, electricians, plumbers, wood, siding, roofing that goes out, that's taken out of the market and put into these new houses. Instead, and we've gotten a zero net, very limited net increase in housing and a loss of a lot of market affordable housing. So if there were fewer tear downs, there'd be more resources to help build the other housing, which we clearly desire based on our last discussion. And I'll try to move quickly here, a lot of slides, but just trying to kind of establish the issue. Somewhat unscientific or not quite as rigorous, just reviewing people that review Zillow or any of the other open market real estate websites will notice that it's really overloaded with these new construction, these tear downs at this point. Obviously, there's a lot of off-market transactions going on, but I think that this, when we talk about the median housing price being 1.3 million in 2021, or I think even 2022, I saw in the housing plan working group draft plan that it was already approaching 1.5. It's really actually kind of higher. That's a lagging indicator. Things are moving a lot faster, shockingly, despite the rising interest rate on mortgages and construction costs. And so what this looks like is you just have, when people say, well, the median housing price is 1.4 million or 1.5 million, that really just tells you what's in the middle of your data set. That doesn't tell you the shape. And when you start listing out all the houses, you see that you basically have two choices. You don't really have a 1.4, 1.5 million dollar house. Those are not common. You either have an older house or multifamily or a condo or a new construction. And so you really have the two choices. Either you're fortunate, you can get your hands on something that's in the more market affordable range, which you would still probably need to have at least double, if not higher, the state median household income. Or if not, you have to go for a new construction, which you can see is very clustered at the top. And I've also not even included all the much larger houses and properties that are in the acre lots. So whereas in this bottom half, which is what we really want, you have your apartments, your condos, your multifamilies, your single residence, your historical houses. In the top, you have all the brand new construction, which is, I think this is unhealthy for the town and the housing market. So basically, in my opinion, and this is shared based on our history and what I'm hearing from elsewhere in the town, is that we should either limit or at the very least disincentivize teardown activity by changing the zoning bylaws. I don't think that any one bylaw change is going to get us where we need to be, but it has to be a part of the equation moving forward. And I think there was a comment made earlier about, well, we changed the zoning in the downtown and we haven't gotten what we want to see there. And yeah, I mean, that's correct, but I think that that's because you have this avenue for developers where they can buy a house, tear it down, and have a new one being marketed for a healthy, very low risk gain within 9 months. Whereas when you talk about the downtown zoning or the MBTA communities, there's a lot more risk there. You need more financing. You might have special permit or site plan reviews. Okay, maybe that's not going to be there for MBTA communities. I don't want to get into that, but this is just a very simple way to have a very good return, and it's detrimental to the health of the community, and it's working contrary to what we want to achieve in housing affordability in Needham. As I mentioned previously, above all else, this is about housing affordability, protecting the median and below median value housing stock. However, the other positive externalities are protection of environment, trees, putting up retaining walls, leveling of the terrain, maintaining the character of the neighborhood, and also signaling to developers and other towns that we really want you to focus on adding housing below the median value in our town or at the median value, rather than recycling older properties just for a financial gain. Because as by definition, when you see those houses on Zillow that are being sold in the open market, they're built speculatively. There's no buyer lined up beforehand. So I don't think it's fair to say that the people are coming and building this for their own needs. I'll try to breeze through the background so we can get on to our discussion. Tear downs have been an issue as long as I've been around, at least a decade. I guess there was some thought that went into this in the late 90s. I wasn't able to find a lot of documents on that. However, thanks to the improved website, it was very easy to look at some of the documents that were around in the 2014 to 2016 period, with the Large Housing Study Review Committee, which culminated in a series of bylaw changes, which sought to achieve exactly what I'm talking about today. However, the reason why I'm here today is because I don't think that they have achieved their goals. Additionally, the Housing Plan Working Group, which completed a draft plan in October, and I'm not sure if it was approved or discussed exactly November, December, highlighted this exact problem. So in 2017, there were a lot of articles passed kind of resetting the expectations for zoning dimensional requirements in the residential areas in Needham, one of which was FAR requirements, which is going to be the main topic that we're discussing today. So this text here, it's quite small. This is from the FAQ, or the kind of the primer for the warrant article of town meeting that year. And basically, the highlighted text, I'll read it, is the zoning bylaw amendment is intended to address concerns with demolition of existing smaller homes being replaced with larger homes in existing neighborhoods and the loss of neighborhood character, which is occurring as a result of this conversion process. All right, so this only focuses on one of the aspects that I discussed before, right? The historical and design and character. Doesn't even get into affordability. The second highlighted text is, since they only consider one dimension at a time, setback and height regulations have not been very effective at preventing the construction of oversized houses. So basically, for this article, which was about FAR, kind of explaining why we need to make FAR a key tool in disincentivizing teardowns. And finally, this last paragraph is really what I believe to be the main problem. Is the key for FAR to work is it really hinges on what is part of FAR, or sorry, I didn't mention for viewers that FAR is floor area ratio, is what counts as floor area and what does not. And I think that there was an error in this bylaw change, in that it explicitly excluded some areas of houses, which I think should be included if we want to achieve this goal. Again, just Housing Plan Working Group. Just last year, a lot of the members still around. Few homes in the private housing stock are affordable to low and moderate income residents. These conditions are exacerbated by substantial teardown activity, where contractors replace modest older homes with larger, very expensive ones, further driving up housing prices and eroding housing options. I'll note that, just a quick aside, when we talk about low and moderate income residents, we're talking about household incomes of $180,000, $200,000. Like, this is double Massachusetts state median income for households of 3 people that or more, which is already one of the richest states in the US. So it's pretty bad. One is a suggested to control teardown activity is a suggested policy change by the Housing Plan Working Group. I did see here that said requires town meeting approval with a simple majority. I'm not clear that it's not clear to me that that's the case. And level of complexity is high. I also am not clear to me that is the case. Difficulty, yes. Complexity, I don't think so. One of the conclusions from the plan was also that of the 943 new single family homes built between 2010 and 21, only 25 did not involve demolition or replacement activity, which means a lot of time, effort, energy, financing has gone into not only not adding any new market affordable housing, but actually making the problem a lot worse. And yes, family sizes have trended upwards in some parts of the country. There are more unorthodox family arrangements, and I can appreciate that some families would want to have that extra space, but not to this degree. I don't think census data really backs that up. So the current bylaw for floor area and floor area ratio in the general definitions, and I believe this was part of my initial emails back over the winter, was that basically floor area is supposed to include all the spaces where people are going to be, the human occupancy, right? We make allowances for uninhabitable space like garages, parking areas, utility spaces, etc. And for good reason, I think. I don't think it's logically, I think it makes sense to exclude those areas. However, for the SRB, for our residential areas, this text was inserted in 2017 to exclude basements, attics, half stories located directly above the second floor, which I think is problematic because, as you'll see, that it really, some of those spaces now function similar to space on the first and second floors. And I think I can understand why it was made at the time, because you want to people do a lot of different things on above the second floor and below the first floor. And to keep things consistent, it makes sense to have a law that treats those spaces differently. However, I just took some screen grabs from the real estate listings from new construction, and you can see that basically a lot of them have the same design principle where they just instead of having like a drop down ladder or a crawl space or something, these are built, the half story is actually a fully functional third floor, albeit smaller and with different requirements in regards to the sloping roof, etc. But this helps drive tear downs because it adds a lot of very valuable space that doesn't count against your FAR restriction. And you know that they're going to be habitable normal spaces because when they're built, the staircase is the dead giveaway. This is just a normal spot where people are going to be coming and going and occupying throughout the year. They're not really storage spaces. So I think that this is kind of a change that the developers have learned to leverage. And the half story really, I understand why it's called a half story, but no one has ever called it a half story when they're living in these houses, designing them or marketing them. They're third floors. And that space that is in the top floor on the right-hand side there should be treated the same as the second floor because they function the same way. So trying to wrap up here is that really overall, I think a proper bylaw would change. There are a number of ways you can do it, but overall, basically, you have to include the places that are used for human occupancy in the FAR calculations, regardless of where they are. This also is relevant to accessory buildings as well. I mean, you don't want unusual. We were talking detached ADUs before. We don't want to have some weird loophole or uncounted space emerge there as well. We should think that if people are living in those spaces, that they should fully count towards the FAR, which obviously was a concern of the vote that occurred just a few months ago. You could also go, so the simplest way, in my opinion, would be to just remove that supplemental text in 4.2 regarding the what counts towards FAR in residential zones. It could also be modified to explicitly state the third floor or half story if you prefer or basement, if finished, should be included. Another approach is this gross floor area where it's just all spaces that have a ceiling above 3 or 4 feet. In other words, anywhere where someone is walking. With allowances for garage, as we already do, or utilities, etc. The ratio might want to be adjusted in that case, and I think that would be a little trickier, but just a thought. I'm just trying to get the ball rolling here. And just an example of what that could look like. The text is the same. But we just changed to say all horizontal areas of each floor in the building, areas in basement, attics, and penthouses, as measured from the exterior faces of the walls, but excluding spaces with headroom of less than 4 feet. Not complex, not really difficult to understand, difficult to pass and agree on, but that remains to be seen. So just to wrap up, this, I think overall this tear down and the new construction in SRB, which really is kind of the lifeblood of the town. No offense to the people that are living elsewhere. I think that in most suburban towns, you really think about the classic 1/4 acre lot with the yard and the driveway and the 2.5 story house. The stock is disappearing, and to let this continue, it doesn't match at all with a town that says they're about supporting housing affordability, sustainability as well, and equity. There is clear and obvious evidence that the town meeting by a 2/3 majority and the previous iteration of the planning board sought to change tear down activity in the town. I would just wonder if we had a time machine and we could go back to 2016 or 2017 and show the people who were voting there in town meeting and planning board what the status of tear downs was in 2023, whether they would keep the bylaw that same way or would they do it differently. And I'm pretty sure it would be the latter. I don't think anyone who had voted yes on those initiatives or worked could be satisfied at all where we are now, where I had prior to this meeting, and I believe in the last packet, if you're viewing, I had submitted 5 examples of problematic tear downs, one of which included a house that was around 1,900 square feet in perfectly livable condition. As soon as the family moved out, it was torn down and they're building a $3 million house there. I think that is exact opposite of what our policies should seek to achieve. I think that there's this discrepancy in what counts towards FAR and what doesn't is kind of a lingering problem and might have an issue. It might rear itself in other ways as we move forward on ADUs and multifamily parcels. Again, a lot of positive externalities by stopping this. I really think that this is great synergy with the MBTA community laws, where we basically send a signal to the market and free up resources for the construction of new housing. Because I'm worried that the MBTA communities, the new apartment 1 zones, the companies, developers might be a little wary because it is an uncertain market. It's hard to say what the demand for those units might be. If there might be the site plan reviews take too long. Is the financing going to be there for developers that want to take this on? Will they build those units in other towns first? If they have the option to keep doing the tear downs and need them, which I don't have the data for 23 or 22, but it seems to me it's going as fast as it ever has, and the prices are as high as they've ever been, even in a climbing interest rate environment, which is I know one school of thought says that takes time to have an impact, but it's not looking optimistic right now. And so, obviously, while it could be difficult to pass it, who knows how people feel when it comes down to a vote. This change is pretty straightforward, in my opinion. It's something that we can do relatively quickly. With that, I'm going to stop. I think that thank you for giving me that much time. Went a little longer, but I think I had a lot of good things to say about why we should take this problem on. So welcome any questions or thoughts.
Thank you very much, Joe. We're grateful for the emails that you started to send, and then your continuing interest on the topic. And I do remember when we were talking about the calculation for detached ADUs, the calculation of floor area ratio, and not including it in certain circumstances. And in floor area ratio calculations, if that's actually omitted, I think in SRA, there is no requirement for floor area ratio.
That's correct.
And so it's really only in SRB, where, like you're saying, we have these smaller lots. And it's not the frequency of the tear down as much as it is the replacement of a small home into a large home, like you're saying, almost tripling the size. So I appreciate the opportunity, to chat about this. Artie, do you?
Thank you, Joe, for bringing this up, because I've thought about this for a long time now. And I think I believe I tend to agree. If you go back to 2017, we're voting on this, looking at the wording, it says attic. And then you see, they're half floor or something like that. All the new homes these days, when they're building, they quote an attic. It's not an attic, it's a version of a third floor, which is full walk upstairs, which is full living space. So I think when people hear the word attic back then, I think, maybe most people are thinking of a conventional attic where you pull down staircase or something like that. So I think it is something that people would have addressed differently back then if they realized, I use the word loophole. If they're looking at that loophole, which comes into play, I think it would have an effect. If we took that space into account in the FAR, I think it could have an effect as far as the size of the homes, the height of the homes, perhaps, the amount of lot that you're taking up. If they still want that third floor, and if they keep to the FAR, they're gonna have to shrink this whole setbacks in. They still want that third floor. We haven't talked about the basement much. My thought train is a little different on the basement ones, but on the third floor, I'm fully on board with what you're talking about there. I think it's a loophole that should be addressed. And I think it should be addressed.
Thank you, Artie. Paul, do you have anything you'd like to?
No, I want to thank Joe for raising the issue. I'm going to say that my recollection of 2016, 2017 is that the concern was not the price of the homes, was not the affordability aspect. The concern was that the tear downs were being replaced by large buildings that didn't fit into the neighborhood because they were so large. And I think that, one of the things that I need to do is really focus in on the Needham housing plan that was just developed, because the issue that you raised, Joe, is the major issue that the planning board, I think, needs to consider, which is, what is the goal that we're looking for? Is the goal what I thought was the goal in 2016, 2017, which is to reduce the size of the houses so that they fit into the lots in a different, without taking up the entire lot like some of them did in those days, too large for the neighborhood, for the single residence B? Or do we need to focus in on the financial aspects? Because you're raising the financial aspects, you're raising the affordability issues, and I don't think affordability and cost of homes was what the issue was in 2016, 2017. And we as a planning board need to decide what our goal is. you gave us, I believe, 5 examples of homes in town that were tear downs to make your point. I looked at those 5 homes. The home that unfortunately is closest to where you live on the corner of Rosemary and Webster is an example, I think, of what you're, from the point of view of the large home, not the affordability aspect, from the point of view of the structure itself, was something that I think the developer really pushed the envelope on that home, and I think
Well,
that home
it's both.
doesn't fit into that neighborhood as it should. But that's not a question of floor area ratio. A second home that I can't really comment on is the home on Greendale. And I'm not going to comment on it because, one, it's situated in an area where I wasn't comfortable parking the car and going and actually taking a look at the lot. It was a very difficult neighborhood. It's also a totally different architectural structure than all the other homes and what we're used to seeing in Needham, which is, you know, a totally different thing. I thought the other 3 homes fit into the neighborhood absolutely fine. They were smaller, they fit into the lots. They had side yards, they had backyards, they were not too tall. I thought that from what we were concerned about in 2016, 2017, they were fine. Focusing in on floor area ratio by itself, to me, doesn't do the trick because you're dealing with the interior of the house. You're dealing with the interior living space, and what we were considering was the size of the bulk of the exterior structure. But you raised the point legitimately. The planning board needs to decide whether in our planning for Needham, which is one of the statutory functions of the planning board, is to come up with planning. Do we want to consider, do we want to shift gears and say, we need to find a way to have affordability, not just meaning, you know, apartments, not just meaning condos that will be $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 homes rather than multi-million-dollar homes. Do we want to focus in on reducing, having zoning that reduces the ultimate cost, the ultimate affordability of a single family home in Needham? That's really the question that I think you're raising, and I think that this is not the time to debate that, but it's a question that the planning board does need to consider and debate. One of the, you know, concerns that I had, I'll just mention this, you know, by saying, well, you know, we have to include the basement and that 3rd floor. I mean, the 3rd floor, we have height regulations. We have height regulations, we have setback regulations, we have lot coverage regulations. And that may be where we need to focus in on reducing the size of the homes. But let's say that we say to a developer, you know, you can only have a floor area ratio that you have now, 0.36, 0.38. But you have to include a finished basement in that calculation. So, I mean, reason that it's limited now to the 1st and 2nd floor is because that gets to the bulk. So if we say, well, so the developer says, well, okay, if I have to include the basement in my floor area ratio, I'm not going to finish the basement. I'll just have a first and second floor and I'll meet the 0.38, 0.36. I met it, sell the house. Now a family moves in and they want to finish the basement. Doesn't change the outside character of the home, doesn't change the neighborhood. But by finishing the basement, they're now in violation of our zoning bylaw. Is that what we want to say to our homeowners? You can never finish your basement without being in violation of our zoning bylaw?
Or you could just say to builders, if you have a basement which is clearly finishable, it has to be included. Or if you have an attic, quote, attic, which is clearly a walk-up attic, it has to be part of it, because you know if it's not finished now, with a walk upstairs, it's going to be finished. Clear. That's the intent.
And then we may have to adjust our floor area ratio upwards. Because with the size, those three homes that I looked at, that to me look absolutely fine on the lots that they were in.
Yeah, but.
And and a lot of these tear downs, because these are old homes.
Yeah, but what are
And
the
people
size?
are taking care of
Yeah, I
them.
mean, no, I understand, but Paul and I have a back and forth.
Yeah.
So I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I don't know what the square footage of those homes are, but you said they fit in. It could be because all the other homes around them have already gone up.
No, it's not.
Okay, what size, what's the square footage? I guarantee if the.
They certainly fit into to the lot coverage nicely.
Okay.
They had nice yards. They were not super high. They were 2.5 story houses. They all had 2-car garages, by the way, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So they weren't, the developers weren't.
Well, I mean, I guarantee if you have to include.
But my point
It's
is,
a floor ratio, it has to include
okay,
those other.
I
those
wanna
other
get back
cases, so
to-
per floor.
these are
It
the
will
issues that are
affect- it will
being
affect-
raised.
Will affect. the
It's
affordability.
8:45 on tonight, and this is something that is going to take a lot of discussion and a lot of consideration. And what we need to do is read this thing. Digest it and see what do we want to plan for in this town?
Agreed. Anything further?
No, I'm done.
Thank you. Jean.
Yes, and what you should focus on is pages 47 through 50. Consider options to better control tear down activity. And it ends up with as was in page 49, as was the case with the Large House Review Study Committee. Planning board might consider appointing a new working group to analyze the impacts of the 2017 zoning change, review additional options, and potentially recommend additional zoning changes. And right at the beginning on page 47, it says one of the options that might be considered is changing the floor area ratio, and which is exactly what Joe Matthews is presenting, and he's presenting a very simple approach to reducing the economic appeal of doing the tear downs, I think is the point. And I think you're right, Paul, that I served in that committee, that Large House Committee. Did you serve on it?
No, I
No.
did not.
Yeah,
It was
I-
Liz Grimes.
I
Who was
served
the
on,
other
yeah,
one?
that's right, Liz Grimes. And I remember saying, and there were developers on the committee and architects, and I remember frankly saying, we really don't think this will affect the number of tear downs. It will continue, the tear down phenomenon will continue, but we expect that these changes will make the new developments more fitting into the neighborhood with better setbacks, ins and outs with bay windows and porches and things that will make them more attractive. That was what that committee came up with. And so you're right, we did not talk about affordability. We did not talk about the tear downs as being just a terrible thing that's happening in our town. We talked about the impact of large, ugly, square, boxy houses too close to the lot lines.
Yeah, it was called the Large Housing Review Study, but it really had no effect on the size of the house. Some of the, like you were talking about some of the primary things, the in and out, there's a chimney, things like that. In some ways, the main quality thing that came out of the review study, in my standpoint, was that in some ways it actually made the house bigger, but architecturally wise, it made it more pleasing, because now instead of setback going to the gutter line, for example, it now went to the wall. which means architecturally, you can have a more proper overhang. Is now it doesn't have to be counted against you for your setback, but that can make the houses bigger. I don't remember any effect on this housing review study having any effect as far as reducing the size of houses whatsoever.
And
I think-
But I think we have to pay attention to the issue. And what I want to end my comments with is saying, we just went through a very worthwhile process of setting our goals for long-range planning over the next year or two. And we,
Long-range planning is not a year or two.
What's that?
Long-range planning is not a year or two.
Well-
Long-range planning is 5 or 10 years.
I'm not talking about short-range planning, the very next annual or special town meeting.
Yeah.
And we went out 3 or 4 annual or special town meetings, and I think we call that long range planning. But I don't think we included the study of large houses or,
I did,
You did.
there was just a question of it, and it was a function of, given all these other priorities that we have, where do we fit it in?
I know.
I think it is I'll speak when it's my turn, so Gene, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's all I wanted to end with is, what did we say about working on this in our layout of our planning
Right.
goals for the coming years?
I think Adam was gonna update the table. Have you updated the table yet?
I'll do that, so that would, in our next meeting, we'll be continuing our ongoing discussion of planning items. Natasha, did you
I
want
just-
to?
I just wanted to thank Joe for his presentation. I thought it was really great. I think as Jean just mentioned, we talked about it very briefly, and I know that there had been a committee that had talked about it a while ago. And I think it's something that has to be reviewed and revised. So I appreciate what you brought forth. I think it needs to be studied further. And I think that as Paul was saying, there are some things that you mentioned that are no brainers, and there are other things that may affect others, other things that have to be taken into account. So I appreciate all the thought you put into it, and I think it's something that we need to review.
Anything else, Natasha? Okay,
At this
Artie?
time.
Just that, yeah, I mean, no matter what we do, it's all falls under the definition of review. I do think in this particular case, I do see that 2017 large housing study committee and the language in there, I do see that as a loophole. Maybe it was intentional. I mean, it visually was intentionally put in there, but I do see that as more of a loophole. It didn't, no houses got reduced from this. Whereas if that was language is taken out, I can easily see the houses are potentially, not all of them, but some of them would be reduced in size. They would.
I'm just gonna comment that I think that the lot coverage and the fact of the floor area ratio limitation on the first and second floor, both of those substantially reduced the bulk of the houses that were being built. I mean, I keep harping back.
I didn't. see-
There's a
I
house
didn't
on the
see any
corner,
reduction.
there's a house on the corner of Parish Road and Central Avenue that takes up the entire lot.
Yeah,
That's what we were getting before the 2016-2017 changes. And now we're getting houses that fit the lots better. I think that as part of what the issue is maybe we should be re-examining the setbacks. Maybe we should be re-examining the height. I mean, part of the problem with that house on the corner of Webster and Rosemary is that the way we measure the height is from grade, and that developer increased the grade.
Yeah,
There's.
Substantially.
I've seen that in many places.
Yeah, so that all of a sudden you had a house that now is not fitting into the neighborhood.
Right, 3 or 4.
Way too tall
Maybe 3 or
because
4 feet
they
up or
changed the
something.
grade, maybe we should be measuring from the street instead of. from the grade.
I think you're supposed to measure from the grade before the construction.
Yes,
Yeah,
That
well,
got changed.
Yeah, well,
that did get changed.
That was changed, right.
Yeah, I mean, just.
The height- the
we
height-
have, we have a lot coverage of 25%.
Yeah.
And I was told by someone today that that house actually is just under 25%.
Yeah.
You
Just
know,
keep
that
in-
developer, as I said, pushed the envelope.
Just keep in mind, FAR, I mean, it's supposed to be living space. We're supposed to be dealing, FAR is supposed to be looking at living space. Ranks, we're not counting the basement. I can appreciate why, perhaps. But I can't appreciate the fact that they have a full walk-up livable attic. Or third floor, excuse me, third floor. That's living space. That's full living.
But that's a
and-
question of height.
Exactly.
Well,
That's a question of
fine, it's a
height.
question of height, but it would reduce the mass. If they weren't gonna do that, they wouldn't, the mass would be different. Things would be, it would be different. The mass would be different.
Anything further?
Would you like to be something further?
Up to you.
I mean, I think it's a loophole. I think it would be a simple fix to move that loophole. I don't think we need a 2 or 3 year study. Which we might need to have anything related to setbacks to change the loophole.
That gets to the heart of it. Joe has presented a simple solution. We either want to pursue it, and there's no reason to pursue it in 2 years. We could pursue it in a very short period of time. Or it's part of a larger study. We need to consider a lot of factors. It's going to need the formation of a study committee, et cetera. Is that really, there really are two ways to go with this.
And I think that this planning board needs to discuss that, not tonight.
So I recognize the time and I deal with this question quite a bit, because as a realtor, I'm dealing with builders fairly frequently. And I'm certainly dealing with single family homeowners, both as buyers and sellers. And it's, Joe, I see your hands up and I'll come to you in a minute. The truth of the matter is all of the dimensional regulations together impact the size, shape, and bulk massing and aesthetics of the home. The ones that do play as the significant to control that height, is a very significant one. The lot coverage is a very significant one. When we talk about modifying, for instance, if you got 3,000 square feet on 2 floors, and then you finish roughly 1,000 square feet, it really works out to be less in the basement. Let's say 500-600 square feet in the basement. Another 500 square feet in the attic, and now you're at 4,500 to 5,000 square feet. There is something to what Paul had said earlier that's just the internal mechanics of the house. And I think it's an oversimplification to focus on one definition, which I do recognize. Now you're going to take a home that instead of selling for between 2.3 and 2.9 million, is going to be selling for 1.5 to 1.8 million. And I would be hard pressed to say that makes it, it's less expensive, significantly less expensive. And yet that still, to your point, Joe, $1.8 million is, regarded as still a very expensive home by any measure. So it doesn't actually, so modifying that restriction to the most extreme form doesn't actually make as much of a dent in affordability. And in addition to that, we have to be cognizant of the impact that has on a homeowner. So if a homeowner today owns a piece of land and they're allowed to build, let's say 5,000 square feet, including a basement and an attic. And that lot today is generally worth about $1 million, 900, 950, 800, depending on exactly where that lot's located, but roughly $1 million. And now you reduce that by 40%. Who's going to pay for that?
Someone who doesn't want to tear the house down, just wants to live on it.
Hold
No,
on.
you asked the question. That's what's gonna happen.
I appreciate that. And I'll give you an example of my own house. But first, I'm gonna say that the actual homeowner, that seller,
Mhm.
who might have, hopefully will have at that point retired their mortgage.
Mhm.
And now this home is their nest egg, and instead of getting $1 million for the home, you know, they'll suddenly be getting
800.
at best 700. A builder, you know, the economics have to work when an end user purchases a home, they don't have a margin to make.
Yeah, but the economics have to
I'm
work
not
for a
done yet.
builder, they don't have to, for someone who's gonna buy it and live in it, those are different economics.
Now, what, I'm gonna rephrase what I think Adam is saying, because this is something that I thought of during the consideration for tonight. You have residents of Needham, okay, who are counting on the fact that they have $1 million asset or a $1.2 million asset. And we can change our zoning bylaw so that that 1 million or $1.2 million asset, by our changing the bylaw, is now only worth $800,000. They've just lost $200,000 to $400,000 in value that they may have been counting on to sell their home and have this nest egg to help fund their retirement. And that's something that we have to seriously consider, because we're gonna have a lot of people who live in Needham who are now in their 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe in their 80s, and we're going to automatically make them $200,000 to $400,000 poorer than they were yesterday.
Well, that's a big leap to $400,000.
It's
You know,
not-
But again, you're assuming that marketplace of that economic viability for as far as a builder. There's the marketplace, the economic viability from buying a house and not
I'm gonna say
wanting
time
to
out.
tear it down.
Time out.
No, well,
Time
no,
out.
No, but you're bringing up these arguments, so I repel them. This isn't necessarily a fact.
Don't feel compelled to do so. It is actually my opportunity to speak. And I understand that you were concerned before, you've expressed to me that you wanted fairness. And I've been diligent in making sure that I didn't speak after everyone has spoken, and yet tonight throughout, that's exactly what you've done, okay?
I agree.
So, and that applies to both of you, because I'm present, I can speak for myself and raise my own points. I appreciate your willingness to do so. And in the interest of time, I'm not gonna continue, except to say that the question of there is a question of tear down, which is the frequency of how many homes are being turned over. And I think I measured it at maybe 1.5, which I recall is in line with certainly with many communities. But
what is that 1.5?
it's a calculation that I can explain on another time, but it's the frequency of, it's the frequency of new home construction as opposed to all homes on the market.
Okay,
Now, the other point is, the other point is the size it's replacing. And then secondarily, affordability. The truth is, no one mechanism is going to solve all three of those. We have to actually, as a community, accept the fact that there is going to be a natural level of turnover and frequency. That's common, and I don't actually see from when I work in this community and other communities that this community stands out. But we certainly do, it certainly is very common that that these homes are being replaced by a larger home. It's also true that the purpose of the large home review committee, as I recall, was to make those homes more proportional on the lot that they had otherwise been. And I think to an extent that has happened, although in SRB, I acknowledge you have a large house on a seemingly smaller lot next to perhaps an older home. In my own case, I lived my first home in Needham, I rented, and then I was fortunate enough to be able to buy the house, but initially I could not. I rented a 1,000 square foot ranch on Central Avenue, and then after we bought it, we subsequently sold the house. Before I put the house on the market, as any realtor typically would, I did speak to a number of builders before, and as an example, builders were offering me the maximum of $650,000. And most of the offers were coming in at 625 for a 1,000 square foot ranch on a lot that was, it was over, I think it was around 12,000 square foot lot. And could certainly build, I was looking at building a large home on that lot. And in the open market, an end user paid more than what a builder was going to pay, because empirically they don't have, you're right, they don't have the same economics, they don't have a margin to make. I had already replaced the roof, the kitchen and windows were in good shape, the floor was in good shape. Homes that are in good shape by, when they're 1,800 square feet, even these 1,000 square foot ranches, like I sold mine to an end user, are in the main going to other end users. It's often the homes that have had substantial deferred maintenance that end up going to builders, and because a homeowner, an end user doesn't have the resources, including time, to be able to improve the home. They want to be able to get in. Maybe they in time will redo a kitchen or something, but it's not as substantial of a thing. So my point, Joe, is that I think it's clear you've seen, and Natasha will come to you in a second, that the planning board is mindful of this subject, where we appreciate that you're bringing it up and you'll continue to bring it up. And yet it's not a simple fix. Anything that we do, even if it's just what seems like a simple change of the floor area ratio, can have a significant impact on homeowners in this town. And I do think that we owe it to them, to the whole community, that we do thoroughly understand the impact that any of these dimensional changes will have. And to Paul's point of what the goals are going to be with that. Natasha, did you want to add another comment? I see your hand is up.
No, I'm just trying to figure out what's the goal of tonight? Like, what are we trying to get to tonight? And I appreciate all that Joe said, but I think it's a bigger conversation for figuring out if there's a group that's coming together and how we want to proceed with it.
So Joe, I'm going to let you chat. I've got some thoughts on that too, and then we can
So,
continue.
yeah,
Go
first
ahead,
of
Joe.
all, are you're seeing me and not my presentation at this point?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, very good. A lot to respond to. Thank you for the comments. I think quickly for Tasha, on my end, tonight was just to raise awareness, have an audience. This is now in the public domain. I can fix up these slides and send them along so everyone can see them. And there was a lot more material that I had. I think, so just responding very quickly to some comments, Paul rightfully said before that before it was about the size and the massing. I agree with that. I'm saying that was an issue before. Now we also have affordability, and the massing and the size is still an issue. So now there's even more of an impetus to do something. He's right. We also just, from my end, we need to clarify our objective. Is this what the result that we want to see? Yes or no? There's a lot of people say they feel strongly about it. Let's just try to start that dialogue. I'm not trying to stop all the tear downs of the poorly maintained houses overall. I think a lot of people would agree if you have a small 1,000 foot, early 20th century house, that should just be there in perpetuity. We should turn that over. But let's try to put something that's a little bit, instead of being $3 million, maybe $2 million is reasonable, which is crazy those are the words that I'm using. Because even those are really high incomes. I think we have the word that I want to use is disincentivize. So they'll basically slide the scale to make it, if it's the better and more livable it is, let's, try to preserve that or encourage renovation or additions to fit the need. If it's truly beyond salvaging, replace that. And I don't think this change would do that on its own. I would say also the example on the Webster and the Rosemary example is the reason why I highlighted is because there was a robust open house and it was marketed as a starter home for people. And then now it's gone. And that's only going to be, and maybe I'm sure there'll be very nice neighbors when they move in. But that's gone to even have a shot at that house, you have to have twice at least, if not more, the state median income. And that's completely gone forever. And I don't think that this one change, you're right, we should do height and setbacks and all that needs to be considered. The one reason I really wanted to focus on this one is because this is where we had the definition change in terms of what we think about FAR is in the residential. I'm also open to height and setbacks and lot coverage, etc. This was just one thing that I was raising. And enforcement is going to be an issue. I mean, that it's going to be back and forth. I don't think that this is a silver bullet to solve this problem. You're right about coming back and finishing a space after the structure is already built. But my counterpoint to that would be, in that case, the sale price of the house should be a lot lower, which would disincentivize the tear down in the case that the existing structure was livable and it would make it more affordable, right? That is if we're thinking about our policy objectives, we should allow people to finish the basements when they're already there and living in it, right? That should be promoted or encouraged, not as for developers as a way to boost the margin and get and secure a better return and create a bigger structure. And then just one final point was there's something that Adam said earlier today is that he said that he didn't want developers, we shouldn't give carte blanche to developers in the town, right? In regards to the MBTA communities law. And I completely agree. And I think that we should apply that to tear downs and new construction.
Well, we have lots to think about here. I'm happy to get together with you and understand, a little more about what you're looking to achieve. And I think this is I'm glad that you're raising the awareness on this. Thank you very much. Unless we have any other further comments, I think we'll probably move on with our agenda. Thank you very much. The board joins me in thanking you for being available tonight, and we look forward to an ongoing discussion.
Yep. Thank you. Sounds good.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Chair.
you.
Good night.
Take care.
The next item on our agenda is an appointment with George Gento Jr., an attorney, to discuss potential A&R lot at subdividing 770 Chestnut Street. And with him tonight is his client, I believe, Stephen Sands, and his sons. So Stephen would like to invite you to the table with you and your guests as well. We'd like you to state your name and an address for the record, one at a time.
Okay.
And then, so let's start with you.
Yep. Stephen Sands, 695 Charles River Street.
Good to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Jonathan Sands, 50 Liberty Drive, Boston.
Michael Sands, same address as.
George, you want to walk us through?
Absolutely. And I think probably it will be easiest and quickest for me to share my screen and show you the Heather Lane approved plan, because I think that's the easiest way to understand it. All right. Everybody see that fine?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So I think some of the board will recall back in 2020, there was a subdivision approval for Heather Lane. And it was a little bit of an unusual subdivision in that there was an old right-of-way that came in off of Chestnut Street and served a number of houses off of Chestnut Street. They all actually have Chestnut Street addresses, even though there's this right of way that serves them that basically was like a road. But in 2020, the planning board approved a subdivision development, which basically took what was a 15-foot wide right of way and 15-foot-ish pavement and widened it to a 40-foot right of way with a 20-foot wide pavement. So basically it became essentially, a road that was consistent with a lot of the other rural private road developments in town. So Mr. Sands is looking at buying this piece here. It says exist lot, right? Existing lot. This lot, which was formerly the site of one house, and you can actually see the driveway coming in here that used to serve the house, which was located down in here. This lot was not a part of the subdivision approval process. And Mr. Sands is interested in buying it and dividing it into 2 lots so that each of his sons who are there this evening can basically move back to Needham and live in the same town as their folks and enjoy the benefits of the town. So, that's kind of a straightforward enough thing. And the issue is whether or not the process to do that is more appropriate to do an A&R plan, an approval not required plan, or whether it is more appropriate to do an amendment of the existing subdivision. Now, I looked at it and I talked it over with Lee, and the consensus, I think, is that probably the thing that makes the most sense is to do this as an approval not required plan, given that the board has basically approved an upgrade of the road to make it essentially the same width and grade as other standard roads in the town. So we're not dealing with sort of a substandard road like we would sometimes have, or we have had in rare occasions in the past. So it's not, it's not a situation like that. We're dealing with a way, although it's a private way, it's a way that basically complies with the current kind of standards and current guidelines for roads. In addition, right now, technically the existing lot would have one house anyway. So we're talking about adding just one additional house off of this way. But because of the scheduling with the planning board and my own schedule as well, before just preparing an A&R and submitting it, I wanted to have a conversation with the board to make sure the board was on board with that and agreed with that approach. Because in the unlikely event that there is a disagreement or a sense that we need to go the subdivision route, that's a whole other process in terms of preparing plans and survey and all that kind of stuff. So basically that's it in a nutshell. And I'd like to hear from the board, and certainly can answer questions if you have any.
What would be required on this to force this into a full subdivision approval process as opposed to an A&R process?
I thought that it probably made sense to process it as a subdivision. I mean, excuse me, as an A&R plan. I mean, the subdivisions that the board did on this basically comprised, I think, lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the decision that was issued, I think, as relates to lots 1, 2, 3, and 6, basically said they couldn't be further subdivided, but the decision did not include the existing lots along the way. And then there was another subdivision decision with the PRD at the end, which allowed, I think, for an additional 5 lots to be built on that lot 4 under the PRD provisions.
As the Heather Lane extension?
As Heather Lane extension. And so the street is in now currently. I think it's binder course minimally is done and it's fully bonded. So I don't know why it couldn't be done as an approval not required plan.
What would be the requirement that would tip this over from an A&R plan into a separate subdivision?
If the lots did not have frontage on one of the kinds of ways that are designated under the subdivision control law. So one way is a way just laid out under the subdivision control law. This way is, although it incorporates a private way, or you could issue an A&R plan on a private way where you deem that the access was suitable and constructed to provide access to the lot. So I think this meets it in either case. It meets it in the sense that we've laid out a road under the subdivision control law, which is the wider road around the private way, and that the private way technically itself now has been improved to the minimal standards that the town has for all of its subdivision roads.
So is that a couple of additional questions from me? Has has Heather Lane been accepted by the town yet?
Heather Lane will not be accepted.
It will always remain a private.
It's going to
road.
be a private way to be maintained by the folks that are actually
Yes.
up at the way. I think the one thing to grab under subdivision approval that you wouldn't have under an A&R approval is that the subdivision approval allows you to create put in place the off-street drainage bond requirements that an A&R plat doesn't. But you're not doing that on any traditional road, so I don't know why you would treat this differently than any other subdivision along a way that is adequate for the purposes of access.
So and this was, the address of this site is 770 Chestnut Street.
Yep.
But it obviously did not have frontage on Chestnut, right?
Oh, it does have frontage on Chestnut.
Well, there's a
Well-
separate lot, a separate house.
It curves around.
Well,
You
so,
can
so,
see it on this plan, but, you know, if you go to Google Maps, and you look at the lot, the lot curves
Oh, yeah.
around
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and goes
So-
off the screen. on
right,
Chestnut.
so as it is laid out right now, it does appear to have frontage on Chestnut Street. However, if you look back, you know, through the title and the various versions, the iterations of the lots and whatnot, this piece over in here that goes out to Chestnut Street is actually that's on a sort of a separate plan. That's a separate pre-existing lot. And so I mean, it's kind of like that's the lot that kind of has frontage on Chestnut, which is just sort of a footnote type of a thing. But more interestingly, while this one happens to have some, you know, you can say it has frontage on Chestnut, none of these other houses in here, all of which have addresses of Chestnut Street, none of them have any frontage on Chestnut Street. This is a very, if you look back through the history, this is a very unique development. There's one other one kind of like it in town off of Central Ave. But
George, those lots weren't created as an A&R lot, I don't think. They were created under the subdivision control.
Of course, and wouldn't they have it now, that the new street is in, wouldn't the addresses of these houses, some of which are brand new, be Heather Lane or Heather Lane Extension?
They're certainly marketed as Heather Lane, because I know that they've been for sale. And those were the
All right,
addresses.
so before the Heather Lane subdivision, there was an existing house here, an existing
Yes.
house here, an existing house here, an existing house here, an existing house here, and an existing house here. All those houses which existed prior to the subdivision,
I
which had
see.
been built over the years, all had access from this old private way. They all had Chestnut Street addresses. And in fact, so at one point, somewhere around about 2004, 2005, there was something that came before the planning board, and I thought I had some notes on it, but I couldn't find them, with respect to, I think it was these lots in here. And there was a finding actually made by the planning board that this right of way was tantamount to a way, to a street, even though it wasn't officially created as a street per se. But in any event, you know, that's kind of, I think, how historically this whole little cluster was done. But in 2020, with the subdivision, it essentially superseded and replaced all that, and basically took this 15-foot right of way that was a quasi road or a quasi street, and it replaced it now with an actual road, you know, Heather Lane. So essentially the situation now is completely and fundamentally changed. And now the lots all do have frontage, you know, on this way as it's been reconstituted. But historically, none of these, all these lots they were all addressed as Chestnut Street, but none of them had frontage on Chestnut. And it was only a 15-foot right of way that gave them access.
So I appreciate that answer. That's helpful. The last question that I have, and I don't know if I should address this to you or to George, how do you intend to handle drainage? The Bill Piersack built this subdivision. His whole subdivision had all the requisite drainage systems for those 10 units that he was ultimately developing, but not for more. So obviously this is its own private separate parcel. So how would you intend to handle drainage?
I'm gonna hire a builder.
Adam, I can take a stab at that. So, you know, when you do a subdivision, there's sort of two separate drainage components. The first one,
Lee, were you saying something?
Paul, I asked you a question.
it seemed to me that that's a question of the building permit process. That's got nothing to do with the subdivision or the A and R plan. That has to do with building. If you've got drainage, the drainage issues are you going to the building commissioner and saying, I want to build a house here. And the building commissioner says, well, if you want to build a house here, then you have to meet our drainage requirements.
Our
Right.
new stricter.
Our new stricter drainage
That's right.
requirements, and so that's a building issue, not a subdivision issue.
So George, you were gonna say something?
Well, Paul just jumped to part two of my explanation, but so on a subdivision, you typically have kind of two sets of drainage. You've got drainage for the roadway, which is a part of the actual subdivision for your infrastructure. And then you have sort of drainage for the houses on the lots. And as Paul indicated, that's, each house has to have infiltration for the roofs, but that's tied to the building permit. And that's something that's, you have to do your soil test and figure out the size and location of your infiltration system. And that's just a part of every new house construction, essentially, no matter where you are, whether it's a new subdivision, a public street or old private way or whatever. That's any new house is going to have to deal with that.
Thank you very much. Jean, did you?
I have a question about where the frontage will be for these two houses. Will there be sufficient frontage for the two lots to have on Heather Lane? Or are you talking about some complicated L Street thing where some frontage is on Chestnut Street?
Now, there's enough distance along Heather Lane to have the two lots to have frontage on Heather Lane. And as you can probably tell just by looking at the plan, there's way more than adequate area as well. So
It's about 350 feet.
So there won't be any issue with house width, lot width, or any of the other aspects of our zoning.
Exactly. And in fact, the rough plan right now would essentially be to take a line and essentially drop it, right through here, roughly parallel, to this line and kind of this line over here. So they'll be relatively straight, long rectangular lots.
And I recall our process in 2020 on Heather Lane, and that this land at the beginning there was not part of the development. And I think we knew at the time that those lots could later be subdivided, even though the owner wasn't participating in all of the class of improvements of Heather Lane. But I think there's no reason why that could not and be treated under the Subdivision Control Act.
Right, it's an A&R plan.
Yeah, and I think that's what we knew at the time, even in
Yeah.
2020.
Very good. Paul, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I look forward to seeing the A&R plan.
Artie, do you have any comments? or
The
questions?
only question I have is something you brought up, Jane, is the subdivision was created with the builder putting these houses up, putting all the money for the new infrastructure on that road. And
He
how
knew what
did-
he was doing.
Exactly.
What I'm saying, he paid for all the infrastructure.
Yeah.
What happened with these two houses then being built and then access onto Heather Lane? Does he have any?
Mr. Piersack knew what he was doing.
Okay,
He took that into account.
okay.
Is there, Natasha, do you have any comments or questions?
No, they have all been asked or I've heard responses of the ones that I did have, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. George, do you have anything further for us?
No, that's it.
Mr. Sanders, do you have anything further?
No, thank you for your time.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Best of
Thank you.
luck. We look
Thank
forward to the A&R.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, George.
These are gonna be $4 million houses, can you figure for
We're allowed. Thanks, folks.
Are you twins?
We're not, I'm 4 years old.
You look so much alike. I have twin sons, so I asked. Anyway, you
Thank you.
look very much alike.
The next item on our agenda is the application to reduce the bond for the Bell Lane subdivision. I note for the record, we received a letter dated May 16 from our town engineer saying that the subdivision work is complete and the road has been accepted by the town. And he has no objection to releasing a $20,000 bond. I'm going to go down my colleagues' Natasha, do you have any comments or questions about the bond release? Artie, do you?
No.
Jean, do you?
No, no question.
Paul,
No
I
comment.
know that we approve the bond release.
we have a motion by
Second.
Paul, a second by Artie. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert,
All right,
Artie Crocker, Natasha Spada,
Aye.
Jean McKnight,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. We have a dispense with that item. The next item on our agenda is the Board of Appeals agenda. Do my colleagues have any comments on those two cases? Jean?
I do have a comment at 165 Brookside Avenue. This only focuses on a certain nonconformity. But it also appears that it has a lot area, a frontage, and a left setback nonconformity. It only focuses the application, which was done without an attorney. It apparently was done by the property owner. Only mentions the left setback. And shouldn't the application also mention the lot area and the frontage nonconformity so that the Board of Appeals knows that's what they're dealing with and the decision
I'm
therefore?
sorry, are you saying that the frontage and the lot area are non-conforming?
Yes,
Yeah,
But
they
the
are, but it's not
modification,
mentioned at all in the application.
but the modification, is the modification altering any of those, Lee? Non-conformities? No.
no, but I think Jean's right. I think they should mention the fact that it's non-conforming in that regard.
In all those regards.
So whereas the homeowner filled out the application themselves, did they get any guidance from your office when it's not being handled by an attorney?
Daphne may have had a conversation with them, but she's not managing their filing. So, I mean, I think it's a reasonable comment back to the ZBA that should just be disclosed.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't think it's gonna affect the end result, but. it
For
should be
the
disclosed.
applicant, okay.
right.
Okay.
It should just be disclosed, that's all. Yeah.
So would you like to make a motion?
I move that we comment with regard to 165 Brookside Avenue, that there appear to also be lot area and frontage nonconformities, and that should be mentioned, so that it's considered in the process and mentioned in the opinion, in whatever decision is made.
Should be disclosed in the application.
Yeah,
The wording, I
Should-
think.
Good, thank you.
Should be disclosed in the
Should be
application.
disclosed in the application.
I was
So wait.
second that.
So we have a motion by Jean, slightly edited by Paul, second by
Thank you.
Artie. Any discussion, Natasha? Artie,
No.
Paul?
None.
My only. Okay, thanks, Natasha. Was this something that Daphne, that you and Daphne and the ZBA would discover in the ordinary part of the application review? Or,
The ZBA would probably, hopefully they would catch it when they were holding their hearing on it, yes.
They might have, yes, but why not make a comment?
great, I absolutely agree. Okay, I will come to the vote. Paul Alpert.
Aye.
Artie Crocker, Natasha Spada,
Aye.
Jean McKnight.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Any comment on just salads?
This is what I'm looking forward to be built. That's what I'm, that's my own comment. I'm looking forward to it.
It is,
I move no comment on.
we
I
have,
second, no comment.
No
we have a
comment.
motion by Paul, a second by Jean. Any discussion? Seeing that, I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert,
Aye.
Artie Crocker,
Aye.
Natasha Spada, Jean McKnight.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. We vote no comment on just salad. Now comes the minutes. We have multiple sets of minutes.
Mhm.
Let's January 17. I don't think we had any yellow comments, just the red ones, correct?
There is, no, on January 17th, there on page 3. There are some yellow comments that is. In the review of zoning articles in May 2023 annual town meeting, the first one had to do with liberalizing accessory dwelling units, the first paragraph. and the last sentence, it says, in an accessory structure, it could be located behind the back wall of the principal structure of the. Oh, gosh, no, it's so long ago since I did this. Or whether it should say house, the principal house. So, you know, principal structure is probably clear enough.
Yes,
I'm sorry, let's just leave it alone and as principal structure. Okay, and then,
you did some self-editing.
and then in the next paragraph, the second sentence says, he does not share the view garages in front are offensive. And it's unclear whether the person quoted is Mr. Schneider or Mr. Block.
Mr. Schneider. I don't mean to throw him under the bus. I'm not throwing the
Yeah,
guy under the bus, but I
okay.
remember the comment.
So it should be, Mr. Schneider does not share the view garages in front.
Well, the way you changed it was as he does not, and that referred back to Mr. Schneider, so. I'll
Yeah,
just leave it.
Mr. Schneider said his preference is to allow as he, yes, yes, if it just says he.
Yeah.
Does not share the view, right, okay. And then in the same paragraph, there's a sentence that is unclear. It says, under new construction, the front, it's unclear, the front of what?
I have this as deleted, underlined and deleted. That,
You know, this would be the one, Jean, where you recommended I go back and listen,
Oh.
and then I
And then you put this
edited
another
it based
version?
on what I actually heard listening to the tape.
Oh,
I remember there was one where you said it, and since there's multiple colors, at least in mine, of
Yes.
the editing, I think that's what happened. I listened back, and so I changed it based on what was actually said. So
oh,
That's a
so
good
this
thing.
yellowing, all right. Oh,
you
good.
questioned sort of.
So we don't have to do all this because
think
you
that's
already
right.
dealt with it.
yes.
All right, then, let's.
Can I have a motion?
simplify
Can I
that.
have a motion to,
Motion to accept, I move that we accept the minutes of January 17, 2023 as redlined.
we have a motion by Jean, a second by Artie. Any discussion? I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert.
Aye.
Artie Crocker. Natasha Spada.
Aye.
Jean McKnight.
Aye,
The chair votes aye.
and I move that we accept the minutes of March 17, 2023 as redlined.
We have a motion by Jean, second by Paul. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert.
Aye.
Artie Crocker. Natasha Spada.
Aye.
Jean McKnight.
Aye,
The chair votes aye.
and I move that we accept the minutes of March 28, 2023 as redlined.
Second.
We have a motion by Jean, a second by Paul. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert.
Aye.
Artie Crocker. Natasha Spada.
Aye.
Jean McKnight.
Aye,
And the chair votes aye. April 25.
okay,
minutes.
a couple of questions. On the front, the first page, which is the public amendment to site plan special permit, this has to do with Wingate. Is a reference in the middle of the second paragraph. The traffic engineer noted the traffic study. I think she's referring to the traffic study, is on page 2 of the letter. And I don't know what letter she's referring to.
I think that was part of her submission.
Representative, if you could. There was a letter referred to in the first paragraph, correspondence for the record, a letter from Attorney Evans Huber with revised plans, 2 letters from David Feldman, the specification, a letter from the Design Review Board. And so it's just not clear what letter she's referring to. Is she referring to the letter of Evans Huber?
I believe, because he was the attorney and her
Yeah.
material was included.
Okay, So is it reasonable to say, no to the traffic study? She must have meant is referred to, because it wouldn't be in his letter, the traffic study.
We have to go back and look at the letter.
Yeah. Oh, shall we ask Alex to look at what,
To confirm it's
Whether- all it needs is to go to the letter from Evans Huber and see what's on page 2. And in the second paragraph, make a proper reference to it.
Are you looking at
She's
the
looking at the
submissions?
letter right now.
page 1.
Yeah.
Oh, she's looking at the letter right now.
Yeah.
Oh, you have a letter?
Yeah, she's.
She's got the file. Amazing what Alex can do.
Yes, there is discussion of the traffic study on page 2 of Evan's letter.
So could we just say, no, the traffic study is referred to
On page 2 of Mr. Huber's letter.
on page of Mr. This letter. Okay, so take care of that. Then on page 2, the third full paragraph that, quote calling, Shaler, Director of the Board of Directors of the Council of Aging. Mr. Block, okay, then it's up to you, Mr. Block.
Yes, yeah.
Stated it's a different use, but a similar type of senior living use. It's a different use.
I'm gonna go back to that. Give me a second, please.
Which is the. Just doing with Wingate still?
Yeah. Is this where we're talking about the possibility of the 9 units?
Mr. Feldman, he was from Wingate. Coordinating.
Oh, this is the wind, this is the wind, excuse me, I'm using with 100 West. The board voted unanimously. Cheryl had ordered the buses for your child. Mr. Black stated is a different use. But a similar type of, I mean, we could leave the sentence out.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah,
about to
It's
say,
not clear what it.
without
Arrangement.
further context.
Okay, we'll just take that
It's- I don't-
sentence out. Because the focus is really on this, Shelley's comments. All right, is that the last one? 1, 2, page 6. Page 6. The very last paragraph. Oh, yes, I think what is referred to in the third line, where he says the chairs, we're talking about the new committee that we just discussed tonight.
Mhm.
The chairs will be members of the planning board and other
And it
boards.
should be the select. board.
Yeah, it should just be a planning board and the select board.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of
Yeah.
April 25 as amended?
So moved as amended.
So we have-
Second,
we have a motion by Artie, a second by Jean. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote. Paul Alpert,
Aye.
Artie Crocker,
Aye.
Natasha Spada,
Aye.
Jean McKnight.
aye,
Chair votes aye. The next item on our agenda is a report from our planning staff and board members.
Sure, the RFP for the home committee, was issued on Monday, it's on the street. I'll email you all a copy of it so you can see it, and we expect responses by the end of July, July 28th. And we anticipate interviewing, the folks that have responded that we feel that are appropriate, over the first and second week of August. And making a decision soon after that, to have somebody on board.
My
And-
apologies, Lee, I didn't hear what was sent out.
Pardon me?
What was this for? I didn't hear. what
This
you
is
said.
for the home committee, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
for the consultant that we're gonna hire, so the RFP is on the street, so it's moving forward.
and who will be involved in the interview?
There's gonna be an interview committee, I think it's gonna involve the 2 assistant town managers, myself, Karen Sonneborg, and there's some other folks that I think that Katie has identified.
Okay, good. Oh, that's wonderful, okay.
So
Moving
that's
along.
good news, that is moving
Yes.
along. And the other thing I just wanted to tell you, Needham Cooperative Bank needed a temporary occupancy permit to occupy their ATM machine, which is in the parking lot behind their building. We're still
Very clear, it's a building for a human teller.
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
not a machine.
Yeah, with two
Okay.
parking spaces.
with the
two-
parking spaces,
Two
right?
parking lanes.
Which they wanted to make operational on Monday, and I had engineering go out and do an inspection, everything looks good, but their as-built plans weren't completely done. So they gave us some money from the bank to basically allow
Bank
them.
has money?
The bank has, the bank. Tends to bank any differently than anybody else, right? So we work with the bank and I received the money on Friday, but the reason I'm bringing it up is I have an agreement, which enables us to hold the money now for the next month, which is, or actually the next 2 weeks, to give them time to finish the as-built drawing, but I want you to sign tonight, which is why I bring it up.
There's someone in the building and I saw a now open sign on it.
They were scrambling last week, so therefore planning becomes our emergency, but we did make it work for them. Although we did get some money to make it work.
So, anything further to report?
No, I think the big thing was the issuing of the RFP on Monday.
Do they need to
So-
vote that or no?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's the stuff.
I was gonna mention at this point, but there were a number of revisions to our planning document, which I'll complete and send and will include in the next packet. Anyone else have anything to report?
Why is this only until May 1?
Because that's how long the committee runs. The work of the consultants done in the beginning of May. If we have to extend it, we'll extend it.
Okay, because I thought the committee was gonna run until town meeting.
No, the committee, the
Yes, design.
charge of the committee is to December 31, 2024. That's in the charge.
Okay, then I gave Alex long instruction, because I know the work of the committee is gonna be done by that earlier date, because that's when the consultants' work is essentially over and it gets turned over to the planning board.
I thought
In May. Yes.
the charge of the
The
home,
committee, I thought the committee would continue on during that planning board process.
I don't think this committee, the charge, the term of expiration is December 31, 2024.
Okay, then
Should we
I
just-
was,
can we
I
just
was looking at, the work program for the committee, and the work program for the committee actually probably ends in beginning of April, but
Well,
For the flexibility, let's say, can we just modify
that's
that by
fine,
hand?
that's fine, just cross it out and change it.
otherwise,
Cross it out by hand.
the fact that I'm not running it. wouldn't
I
be an
can
issue
read
at
that.
all.
My handwriting is terrible.
I'm
so-
sorry.
I can print another one.
Let's just move, get this one.
Yeah, this sheet that we got here says that all the terms expire 12/31/2024.
Okay, instead different than the work program then.
They might stop working May 1.
From the campaign.
If the whole thing were expiring May 1, we wouldn't have had the discussion about, gee, not.
Just while we're dealing with that, we have no correspondence in our package. On that note, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So we,
We can't, can we adjourn before we sign these
we gotta
documents?
sign.
Yeah, you.
Do you need me to go by and sign tomorrow or the next day? Would I
No,
feel
we're all-
better?
We have enough signatures,
Second.
thank you.
Need you, Natasha, but we don't need you.
That's okay. I need to go to bed. I don't feel
Yes.
well.
I'm trying to get you to bed by 9:30. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Paul made it, I seconded it.
I move we
I
adjourn.
made it, then Paul made it, he seconded it. I think we're done. I think we already voted.
No discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Hardy, Natasha,
Aye,
Jean,
Aye.
the chair votes aye. We are adjourned.
thank you.
I'm good. Yeah. Thank you.
So Adam, Jean has no problem with my speaking to her.
I'm gonna, I will say this.
That was helpful.
Artie's, you've raised a point in constructive criticism about me. And Artie, you raised the same point and you raised it to Paul and you raised it to me.
Yeah, and I
About-
appreciate you saying something.
we are all talking over each other,
Yeah.
and that has to stop. We're not
And only
showing,
two of us are Jewish.
we're not showing enough due deference to each other.
Oh, good.
Oh.
But the three people in question, Matt.
Right, here
Well,
these.
No argument.
So, no, I appreciate you saying that, you're actually correct.
We-
I'll make sure, I do as I say. no.
Right.
I do as I say.
We all, it's the. We all need two things, and this came up between you and me, like you all